you know, the public is ahead of all of us at the Capitol of this, as happens in many issues, and they understand instinctively that you need some sort of sane balance here. You can't just cut your way to greatness, nor can you just tax your way to greatness.
Democratic Visions is handmade by volunteers for the entire metro region by DFL Senate District 42.
Representative, the budget.
Yes.
What's going on?
Well, Governor Dayton in the last week released his budget proposal, and it's kind of an opening marker, I think that's fair to say, in what will be a series of ongoing budget negotiations. But I know one thing. First of all, the guy kept his promises. No one can be surprised by what he has unveiled, because that's exactly what he campaigned on. The second thing that I think is really important to note is, hey, this is really moving us in the right direction in terms of fairness and balance. For too long, we've relied on sort of the ideological extremes to navigate our budget debate, and that's not happening here. You have a governor who's finally saying it's going to take mutual sacrifice from many people in the state for us to get our fiscal house in order.
You're doing town meetings and
Yep.
making other appearances, meeting voters.
Right.
What do you hear from people?
There's a sense out there, and I ask this wherever I go, about the economy. I ask people, regardless of your own personal situation, do you think we're turning a corner? And almost universally, people, even across the political spectrum, say yes. Our worst days in terms of this economic meltdown are behind us. We are turning the corner. Things are getting better. The outlook is rosier, so I think that's good. But there is a real frustration, I think, with some folks at the Capitol who seem kind of stuck in yesterday, stuck in the all-or-nothing approach, stuck in the kind of rigid, ideological, really nonsensical positions of the past, and we got to get away from that. That's why I think Governor Dayton's budget is a real step in the right direction. Is it exactly what I would do? No. If I were writing the budget? No, it's not. But is it a step in the right direction towards fairness and finally balance as a way to balance our budget? I think it is, and that is mostly what I'm hearing.
But your Republican colleagues in the House aren't going that route, are they?
No, they're not.
How do you deal with them? What are you saying? What do you talk about with them?
Well, it's tough, and I will tell you that privately and off the record, there are several thoughtful Republicans who know and understand in their bones that we're going to have some revenue in order to balance this budget fairly. They know that. They're not idiots. But there's a lot of political posturing going on right now. And look, you know, part of it, I think, Jeff, is about looking at the budget in a different way than we have for the last several years. The budget is not just a math problem. It's a people problem. It's about real people. And when you look at it through that lens, you understand that you can't just cut. Now, you're going to have to do mostly cuts. And what Democrats had supported the last couple of years, what I voted for and would gladly vote for again, was, I think, a meaningful, common sense, reasonable blend of those two things. What we did last year and the year before was about 85% spending cuts and various shifts, which is essentially a delayed or rolling cut, or can be. And then 15%, 1-5, was revenue increases. So it was 85 to 15. That was vetoed by Governor Pawlenty because he wanted it to be 100% to zero. He wanted all cuts and shifts and zero revenue increases. And so when you ask what to do with our Republican colleagues, I think it's about people in their district contacting them, letting them know what an all-cuts budget really looks like in this kind of climate, how many real people, regardless of party, are going to be hurt by that. Everyday, ordinary, hardworking people. And I think they're gradually going to have to see the light when it comes to having some revenue to offset the cuts and the shifts. I just think that's inevitable.
Okay, so they hear from voters, their constituents, we want you to make a compromise with the governor and the Democrats in the Senate and the House. Is the Republican Party discipline so strong that they are voting in fear?
Well, I don't quite know whether it's fear yet or some sort of calculation that maybe there's a political gain to be had. All I know is that the way we resolved this the last time, we were hurtling towards a crisis like now. It was my first term in the legislature. It was 2005.
Yeah.
And as your viewers may recall, this was the first ever in state history actual government shutdown. It was a partial shutdown, only some small sliver of services that shut down, but it was a partial shutdown. And the way it was handled then, if you recall, is Governor Pawlenty did agree to more revenue in the form of a cigarette tax, but he just called it something else. He called it a health impact fee instead of a cigarette tax increase. Yeah. We all know what it really was, but I have to say, on a serious note, if calling it by another name helps, if not calling it revenue or not calling it a tax helps us to actually get the mild revenue stream that we would need to offset some of these really large and damaging cuts. If that's what it takes, then I'm okay with it. At this point, I think what Democrats need to do is not be so worried about taking credit, but getting the result that is best for Minnesota. And as in 2005, if that means calling a tax by some other name to make certain Republicans feel okay about voting for it, then I'm all for that. For example, our tax code is riddled with so-called tax expenditures. That's what the wonks call it. What it really means is, tax breaks. It can be a deduction, an exclusion, an exemption for businesses and individuals, but largely for businesses. Some of those are demonstrably ineffective. They don't really work, but the recipients have become accustomed to getting those.
Like, for example?
The whole Job Z program that Governor
yeah.
Pawlenty implemented is essentially a series of tax breaks. And when you look at the actual effect in terms of jobs created, it's pretty minimal. And so the question is, can we get rid of some of these so-called tax expenditures or tax breaks? It's a way to bring in more revenue. We could call it something else if that makes certain people happy. I think Democrats are perfectly pleased to be honest and call things what they are, but if others need to call it something else in order to feel comfortable, then by all means, let's call it streamlining. Let's call it, kind of a bottom-up review. But there are some of these tax expenditures that we can get rid of, and that will bring in a fair chunk of change, again, to offset and balance some of these rather harmful spending cuts.
Now, let's say it looks like a compromise is going to be made. Let's say it happens maybe at the end of April or the beginning of May even. Aren't there items, social items, on the Republican agenda with the House and the Senate that they're going to push?
Yes.
And what are you looking for?
One of the newly empowered people at the Capitol is Tom Pritchard, who is the head of the Minnesota Family Council. And believe me, he has a bundle and a basket of proposals that he is pushing with great effect. I think it's a near certainty that we will see a vote on a constitutional anti-marriage amendment. I think it's a near certainty that we will see several votes on abortion politics, and tax policies like requiring a 2/3 vote to raise taxes in the Minnesota legislature, which has been a disaster in states like Colorado and California, where even Democrats and Republicans have agreed on a budget package, but because they can't get 2/3, it's kind of like we would be enshrining kind of a filibuster type impediment in Minnesota's governing structure. Here's a little known fact about the legislative process that a lot of people don't realize. When it comes to placing a constitutional amendment on the ballot, all you need is a bare majority in each chamber. The governor doesn't get to veto a constitutional amendment. So Republicans control the House and they control the Senate. Therefore, if they get all of their members to vote for something and place it on the ballot, Governor Dayton is out of the picture completely. And I believe that you will see at least 2, maybe more, but at least 2 constitutional ballot questions placed on the ballot by the Republican majorities in the House and Senate. And I believe one or both of them will be on social issues.
But you don't think they're so empowered and energized to have more than just 2 or 3?
I think my own analysis is that once you get beyond 2 or 3, it tends to get confusing to voters. We've seldom had more than 2 in this state on the ballot at the same time.
What 2 would you expect to be?
Well, I think they're going to put an anti-gay marriage amendment on the ballot in Minnesota. And I think they'll probably do a second one either on abortion restrictions or on something to do with making it a lot harder than it even is now to raise any kind of revenue in Minnesota. That would be my guess at this point. Wild cards are putting perhaps a so-called right-to-work provision in our Constitution, which would essentially kill unionization and kill collective bargaining in the state for tens and hundreds of thousands of people in our state. And then they might put something like a photo ID requirement in our Constitution to be voted on by the people.
And of course, Wisconsin. Do you anticipate things happening like that over in St. Paul, as is happening in Madison, Wisconsin?
Well, I think because we have a DFL governor, Governor Dayton, I think it's highly unlikely that we'll have the same kind of assault on workers that we're seeing in Wisconsin. And keep in mind, there are some people that are, in my opinion anyway, trying to hijack the debate. And they're making it sound as if these public employee unions, whether they represent teachers or auditors at the Department of Revenue or whomever, that somehow they're being greedy and this is about sort of their greed or overreach. And that's really nonsense. Just a few days ago, the public employee unions in Wisconsin conceded that there will have to be wage cuts. They conceded that there will have to be benefit, including retirement benefit cuts. Everyone's conceding these things. That's not the issue, and that's a distraction. What's really going on in Wisconsin isn't just your garden variety, run-of-the-mill, asking employees to take a hit for the sake of the budget. That's fine. I think most people realize that needs to be done, and it will be done. What's really going on there is an assault on unions and on working people who seek to band together, organize collectively, and make their futures better. Remember, unions built the middle class in this country. Now, it's not for everyone, and it's not for every employee or employer setting, of course, in this country, and people can choose or not choose those settings. But what's happening in Wisconsin, make no doubt about it, is an assault on the right of people to get together, band together, and protect their economic interests. So this isn't about the wages. This isn't about the accepting pay cuts or benefit freezes. That's going to happen, and the unions concede that fiscal reality, and anyone would. This is about a concerted attack on the rights of people to band together to make their lives better.
Democratic Visions is handmade in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka by DFL Senate District 42. Norbert Gurnis, Chair. Democratic Visions can also be seen on our website, dflsd42.org.